I woke up and saw a sold sign on my lawn. My son and daughter-in-law had sold my house and left on a luxury trip. He said, "She deserves the world, Mom. You can stay at the nursing home." I just smiled. 2 weeks later, they returned. I had prepared a gift for them. When they saw it, they fell to their knees. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I've always been an early riser. 62 years of habit don't break easily, even when your world is about to crumble around you." That Thursday morning in October started like any other. I made my coffee, watered my roses, and settled into my favorite chair by the window to watch the neighborhood wake up. That's when I saw it. A bright red sold sign had appeared overnight in my front yard like some kind of cruel magic trick. I blinked hard, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, there it was, bold as brass, announcing to the world that my home of 35 years had been sold. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped my coffee cup. I hadn't put the house on the market. I hadn't signed any papers. I hadn't even thought about selling. This had to be some kind of mistake. I threw on my robe and rushed outside, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete. The sign was real enough. I could feel the metal stake driven deep into my perfectly maintained lawn. The real estate company's logo gleamed in the morning sun like a taunt. "Mom, there you are." I spun around to see my son Dominic walking up the driveway, pulling a large suitcase behind him. His wife Amber followed, her designer heels clicking against the pavement as she dragged her own luggage. Both of them were dressed like they were heading somewhere expensive. Dominic in a crisp button-down I'd never seen before. Amber in what looked like a brand-new travel outfit complete with matching accessories. "Dominic, what is this?" I pointed at the sign with a trembling finger. "What's happening here?" He had the decency to look uncomfortable for about half a second before his face hardened into that expression I'd been seeing more and more lately, the one that said I was just an obstacle in his way. "We need to talk, Mom. Let's go inside." I followed them into my living room, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Amber immediately started looking around like she was appraising everything, her calculating gaze landing on my grandmother's antique lamp, the family photos on the mantel, the Persian rug Harold and I had saved up months to buy. "Sit down, Verna." Amber's voice was syrupy sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. She never called me Mom, never had, not once in the 8 years she'd been married to my son. I remained standing. "Someone needs to explain what's going on. Right now." Dominic ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from his father. "Look, Mom, we've been talking, and we think it's time for you to transition. You're getting older, and this house is too much for you to handle." "I handle it just fine," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I've been taking care of this place longer than you've been alive." Amber laughed, a tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, sweetheart, we're not saying you haven't tried, but let's be realistic here. You're 62. Things are only going to get harder." 62. As if I were ancient, ready for the grave. As if the woman who still did her own yard work, balanced her own checkbook, and could outcook any restaurant in town was somehow incapable of living independently. "The house sold yesterday," Dominic continued, avoiding my eyes. "We got a great offer, $250,000. The buyers want to close next week." The number hit me like a physical blow, $250,000. For the house Harold and I had bought for $35,000 and had spent decades improving. The house where I'd raised my children, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, mourned my husband's passing just 3 years ago. "You can't sell my house," I whispered. "It's not yours to sell." "Actually, Mom, it is." Dominic pulled out a folder from his briefcase. When had he started carrying a briefcase? "Remember that power of attorney you signed when Dad was sick? The one that let me help with his medical decisions?" My blood turned to ice. I remembered that document, signed in a hospital waiting room while Harold was fighting for his life. Dominic had said it was just a precaution, just in case something happened and I needed help navigating the insurance and medical bills. "That was for medical decisions," I said slowly. "It was a general power of attorney, Mom. It covers financial decisions too." Amber was practically bouncing with excitement now. her eyes bright with something that looked disturbingly like triumph. "We're going to Europe, Verna. 3 months touring France, Italy, Spain. Dominic works so hard, and he deserves to see the world. We both do, with the money from selling my house." "It's not just about the trip," Dominic said quickly, but I could see the lie in his eyes. "We're investing in our future. Amber's been wanting to start her own business, and I'm thinking about going back to school. This money will give us the freedom to really build something." I stared at my son. This man I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through countless illnesses, cheered on at Little League games, celebrated when he graduated, walked down the aisle when he married this woman who was now systematically destroying what was left of our family. "And what about me?" I asked quietly. "We've already talked to Sunset Manor," Amber said, pulling out a glossy brochure. "It's a lovely place, very well rated. They have activities, meal plans, medical staff on site 24 hours a day. You'll be so much happier there, surrounded by people your own age." Sunset Manor. I knew that place. I'd visited friends there over the years, watched them fade away in those sterile rooms that smelled of disinfectant and defeat. The activities Amber mentioned were bingo games and craft hour. The people my age were residents who spent their days staring at television screens, waiting for visiting hours that rarely came. "I don't want to go to a nursing home." The words came out stronger than I felt. "I want to stay in my home." "That's not an option anymore, Mom." Dominic's voice was final, the tone he'd used as a teenager when he'd made up his mind about something. "The papers are already signed. The house closes next Friday. We've paid the first 6 months at Sunset Manor. It's all arranged." "You had no right." My voice was barely a whisper now. "We had every right," Amber snapped, her sweet facade finally cracking. "You're living in the past, Verna. This house is falling apart. You're getting forgetful. And frankly, it's time someone made the hard decisions for you." Forgetful. The word stung because it was partially true. I had been more scattered lately since Harold died. Grief does that to a person. But I wasn't senile, wasn't incompetent, wasn't ready to be warehoused away from everything I loved. "The taxi will be here in 10 minutes to take you to Sunset Manor," Dominic said, checking his watch. "Our flight leaves at 2. 10 minutes. They were giving me 10 minutes to say goodbye to my life. What about my things? My photos, my books, Harold's tools in the garage? "The buyers are purchasing it furnished," Amber said dismissively. "But don't worry, we'll pack up the important stuff and put it in storage. You can visit it whenever you want. Visit my own belongings. In storage. Like a museum exhibit of my former life." I looked around my living room one more time. At the spot where Harold used to read his newspaper every evening. At the corner where our Christmas tree stood every December for 35 years. At the kitchen doorway where we'd marked Dominic and his sister Sarah's heights as they grew up. "Where's Sarah?" I asked suddenly. "Does she know about this?" Dominic and Amber exchanged a look. "Sarah's in California, Mom. She's got her own life. We didn't want to burden her with this situation. Sarah, my daughter, who called me twice a week, who would never have allowed this to happen. They'd deliberately kept this from her, knowing she would fight them." A car horn honked outside. The taxi. "Time to go, Mom." Dominic picked up a small suitcase I hadn't noticed before. Apparently they'd packed for me too, decided what few belongings I'd be allowed to keep. As we walked toward the door, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked exactly like what they'd reduced me to. A confused old woman being shuffled off to die quietly out of the way. But my eyes still held fire. "You know what, Dominic?" I said as he opened the front door. "What, Mom?" "Your father would be ashamed of you." For just a moment, his confident mask slipped, and I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Then Amber's hand touched his arm, and the mask was back. "Have a good trip," I said quietly, and walked toward the taxi without looking back. But as the car pulled away from my house, my former house, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what they didn't know they'd lost by underestimating me so completely. The game was just beginning. The smell hit me first. That institutional blend of bleach, cafeteria food, and something else I couldn't quite identify but recognized immediately as the scent of people waiting to die. Sunset Manor looked exactly like its brochure from the outside. Manicured lawns, cheerful yellow siding, windows with flower boxes that probably hadn't seen real flowers in years. Inside was a different story. The lobby tried too hard to feel homey, with fake leather furniture arranged around a television that was blaring a game show no one was watching. 3 residents sat in wheelchairs near the window, staring out at nothing. One was talking to herself in a steady mumble. Another kept trying to stand up, only to be gently pushed back down by a harried-looking aide who barely looked old enough to drive. "You must be Verna." A woman in scrubs approached with a clipboard and that practiced smile I was already learning to hate. "I'm Nancy, the intake coordinator. Your son called ahead and took care of all the paperwork. Wasn't that thoughtful of him?" "Thoughtful. Right. Let me show you to your room." The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with doors that all looked the same. Some were open, revealing glimpses of lives reduced to single rooms. A few photos on a nightstand, a crocheted blanket, a chair positioned to catch whatever sunlight managed to filter through small windows. My room was on the 2nd floor, at the end of the hall near the emergency exit, room 207. The number was printed on a nameplate that already had Verna Mitchell typed in neat letters, as if I'd always belonged here. "This is lovely," Nancy said, opening the door to reveal a space barely larger than my former walk-in closet. A single bed, a dresser, 1 chair, and a window that looked out at the parking lot. "You'll have meals in the dining room downstairs. Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 5. There's bingo on Tuesdays, craft time on Wednesdays, and we have a lovely little library down the hall." She handed me a thick packet of papers. Rules and regulations, activity schedules, meal plans. "Any questions?" I had about 1,000 questions, but none that Nancy could answer. Like, how had my life shrunk to this? How had I gone from being an independent woman with her own home to being warehoused in a room that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner? "The bathroom is shared with the room next door," Nancy continued. "Mrs. Henderson is very quiet. You'll like her. Oh, and visiting hours are from 2 to 6 on weekdays, 10 to 6 on weekends." Visiting hours. As if I were an inmate. After Nancy left, I sat on the narrow bed and tried to process what had happened. 24 hours ago, I was watering my roses and planning to reorganize my kitchen cabinets. Now I was surrounded by strangers, eating meals I didn't choose, living by someone else's schedule. I unpacked the single suitcase they'd allowed me to bring. 3 dresses, some undergarments, a few personal items, and 1 framed photo of Harold and me on our wedding day. That was it. 62 years of living reduced to the contents of 1 small bag. Dinner was served in a dining room that tried to approximate elegance with plastic tablecloths and artificial flowers. I was assigned to table 4 with 3 other residents: Margaret, who insisted on telling me about her grandson who never visited, Rose, who spent the entire meal rearranging her pills, and Edward, who slept through most of it. The meatloaf was oversalted and the green beans were mushy, but I ate every bite. I needed to keep my strength up. I had a feeling I was going to need it. That night, lying in the narrow bed listening to unfamiliar sounds, someone crying down the hall, the elevator's mechanical groaning, the night shift aide's footsteps on linoleum, I let myself feel the full weight of what Dominic had done to me. He'd stolen more than my house. He'd stolen my independence, my dignity, my right to choose how to live my remaining years. And he'd done it while kissing me goodbye and calling it love. But as I lay there in the dark, something crystallized in my mind. Dominic had made one crucial mistake. He thought I was weak, thought I was helpless, thought I would just accept this and fade away quietly. He didn't know about the safe deposit box I'd maintained separately from our joint accounts after Harold died. He didn't know about the small nest egg I'd been building, money I'd saved from the life insurance and my part-time job at the library. He'd always assumed I was financially dependent on him, and I'd let him believe it. He also didn't know that when Harold was dying, I'd made sure to understand every detail of our finances, every account, every asset. Dominic thought he'd used some forgotten power of attorney to sell my house, but I remembered exactly what I'd signed that day in the hospital. And it wasn't what he thought it was. The power of attorney I'd given him was specifically for Harold's medical care. I'd been careful about that, even in my grief. The document he'd shown me today, I'd only gotten a quick look, but something about it hadn't looked right. The fonts were different. The paper was too new. Had my son forged legal documents to steal my house? I smiled in the dark. If he had, he'd made an even bigger mistake than he knew. The next morning, I made my first friend at Sunset Manor. Her name was Dorothy, and she was sitting alone at breakfast reading a romance novel while eating oatmeal. "That any good?" I asked, settling down across from her. She looked up, surprised. Most people here didn't start conversations. "Oh, this?" She held up the book. "Pure trash. I love it. I'm Dorothy. Verna, I'm new. I can tell. You still have fight in your eyes. Give it 6 months, it'll be gone." "Will it?" Dorothy studied me more carefully. "Maybe not. You're different. Most people who end up here are broken when they arrive. You look mad." "I am mad." "Good. Angry people cause trouble. This place could use some trouble." Over the next few days, Dorothy became my guide to life at Sunset Manor. She showed me which aides would sneak you extra dessert and which ones would report you for the smallest infractions. She explained the unspoken hierarchy among residents, the politics of seating arrangements, the best times to use the phone in the lobby for private calls. "The trick," she told me as we sat in the small garden behind the building, "is to make them think you're adjusting while you figure out your real plan, whatever that might be." I was beginning to understand that Dorothy was sharper than she let on. She'd been here for 2 years, ever since her daughter moved to Arizona and decided long-distance caregiving was too inconvenient. But unlike most of the other residents, Dorothy hadn't given up. She was biding her time, waiting for something. "What's your story?" she asked me directly. So I told her about Dominic, about Amber, about waking up to find my life sold out from under me. Dorothy listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. "Your son forged papers," she said when I finished. "Has to be. Power of attorney for medical decisions doesn't cover real estate transactions. I should know. I was a paralegal for 30 years before my arthritis got too bad." My suspicions confirmed. "What can I do about it?" "Depends how smart you are and how much fight you've got left." I thought about my empty room upstairs, about Dominic and Amber probably sipping wine in some French cafe right now, spending my money on their dream vacation while I ate institutional food and followed someone else's schedule. "I've got plenty of both." Dorothy smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen since arriving at Sunset Manor. "Good. Because I think it's time someone taught your son that stealing from old ladies isn't as easy as he thinks." That night, I made my second phone call from the lobby. The first had been to my bank, confirming that my separate accounts were still intact and inaccessible to Dominic. This call was to a lawyer. As I dialed the number Dorothy had given me, I caught sight of my reflection in the lobby's mirror. I didn't look like a defeated old woman anymore. I looked like someone with a plan. And I did have a plan. It was going to take patience, and it was going to require letting Dominic think he'd won a little while longer. But when I was finished, my son was going to learn that the woman who'd raised him was far more formidable than he'd ever imagined. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. "Peterson and Associates, how can I help you?" "I'd like to speak with someone about elder abuse," I said quietly, "specifically about getting my stolen house back." The law office of Peterson and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a downtown building that had seen better days. But Margaret Peterson herself was everything Dorothy had promised. Sharp, experienced, and most importantly, angry on behalf of clients like me. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, reviewing the documents I'd managed to obtain copies of. "What your son did isn't just morally reprehensible, it's criminal fraud." I sat across from her desk, Dorothy beside me for moral support. Getting out of Sunset Manor for this appointment had required lying to the staff about a doctor's visit, but Dorothy had coached me through it. The nursing home operated on the assumption that residents were too addled or defeated to cause trouble. They didn't pay much attention to where we went during the day as long as we showed up for evening medications. The power of attorney you signed, Margaret continued, pulling out a magnifying glass to examine the signature, was clearly altered after the fact. Look here. The ink density is different. The paper has been tampered with, and the notarization is questionable at best. She leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. Your son took a limited medical power of attorney and modified it to appear as though you'd granted him broad financial authority. Then he used that fraudulent document to sell your house without your knowledge or consent. Can we get the house back? Absolutely. The sale is void. You can't legally transfer property based on forged documents. But there's a complication. My heart sank. What kind of complication? The buyers are innocent third parties. They purchased the house in good faith, believing your son had the legal right to sell it. While we can absolutely reverse the sale and get your house back, it's going to take time. Meanwhile, they've moved in and started making improvements. How much time? 3 to 6 months, assuming your son doesn't fight us? If he does, she shrugged. Could be longer. 3 to 6 months. I thought about the institutional meals, the shared bathroom, the constant smell of disinfectant and defeat. Then I thought about Dominic and Amber toasting their good fortune in some European hotel, probably already planning how to spend the rest of what they thought was their inheritance. There's something else, Margaret said carefully. The sale price concerns me. $250,000 for a house in your neighborhood? I looked up recent comparables, and similar properties have been selling for closer to $400,000. Either your son was in a tremendous hurry to close the deal, or what? Or there was some kind of arrangement between him and the buyers, a below-market sale that benefited someone other than you. I felt a cold fury building in my chest. Not only had Dominic stolen my house, he'd sold it for far less than it was worth. Either through incompetence or corruption, he'd cheated me out of an additional $150,000. What do you recommend? I asked. Margaret pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. First, we file criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. The district attorney's office takes these cases seriously, especially when there's clear evidence of document forgery. Second, we file a civil suit to reverse the sale and recover damages. Third, we freeze any accounts your son might have access to prevent him from spending or hiding the proceeds. He's in Europe right now, spending the money. Even better, financial records will show exactly how he used the funds from your house sale. If he's been living it up in 5-star hotels and expensive restaurants while claiming he was acting in your best interests, that strengthens our case considerably. Dorothy reached over and squeezed my hand. This is going to work, Verna. But I was thinking beyond just getting my house back. Dominic had humiliated me, had treated me like a confused old woman who could be easily disposed of. He'd dumped me in a nursing home and flown off to Europe without a second thought. Legal action would get my property back, but it wouldn't teach him the lesson he really needed to learn. Margaret, I said slowly, how long before Dominic knows we're taking legal action? We'll need to serve him with papers, so he'll know as soon as he gets back from Europe. Why? When is he supposed to return? I thought back to that horrible morning when they'd torn my life apart. Amber had mentioned a 3-month trip. It had been 2 weeks since they left. About 10 weeks from now. Perfect, I said, an idea beginning to form. I want to wait to serve him until he's back in the country. Let him enjoy his vacation. Let him spend every penny he thinks he's stolen from me. And in the meantime, I'd like to make some arrangements of my own. Margaret raised an eyebrow. What kind of arrangements? I smiled, feeling more like myself than I had since this nightmare began. The kind that will teach my son that underestimating his mother was the biggest mistake of his life. Back at Sunset Manor that evening, I sat in the common room pretending to watch television while actually planning my next moves. The other residents were focused on a rerun of some old detective show, but I was thinking about justice, the legal kind Margaret would deliver, and the personal kind I was going to craft myself. First, I needed more information about exactly what Dominic had done with my money. Margaret could get financial records through legal discovery, but I wanted details sooner than that. I needed to understand the full scope of his betrayal before I decided how to respond. Second, I needed to secure my own financial position. Dominic knew about some of my accounts, the ones Harold and I had shared, but he didn't know about everything. Over the years, I'd learned to maintain some independence, especially after watching friends whose husbands controlled every penny. Harold hadn't minded. He'd actually encouraged me to have my own safety net. That safety net was about to become Dominic's worst nightmare. The next morning, I made another doctor's appointment and took a taxi to my bank. The manager, Mr. Curtis, had known Harold and me for over 20 years. When I explained what had happened, his face went through several shades of red. That's unconscionable, Mrs. Mitchell. Absolutely unconscionable. He pulled up my accounts on his computer. Your individual savings account and the certificate of deposit are untouched. Your son doesn't have access to those. Combined, you have about $85,000. More than enough for what I had in mind. I want to make some transfers, I told him, and I need to discuss setting up a trust. Mr. Curtis nodded. Smart thinking, protecting your assets from further. He paused delicately. Family interference. By the time I left the bank 2 hours later, my money was secured in accounts Dominic couldn't touch, even if he somehow gained access to my original financial information. I'd also opened a new checking account under my maiden name and set up a post office box for mail. My next stop was a real estate office. Mrs. Mitchell! The agent, Linda Hayes, jumped up when she saw me. She'd helped Harold and me refinance our house a few years back. I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. When Dominic came in with those papers, I should have insisted on speaking with you directly. You had no reason to doubt him, I said, though privately I disagreed. A good real estate agent should have been suspicious of such an unusual situation. But I'm hoping you can help me with something else. I explained what I wanted to do. Linda's eyes grew wider with each detail. That's brilliant, she said finally. And completely legal. Your son has no idea what's coming, does he? None whatsoever. When do you want to start? I thought about Dominic and Amber, probably sitting in some sidewalk cafe in Paris right now, congratulating themselves on how cleverly they'd handled the Verna problem. I thought about the other residents at Sunset Manor, people who'd been shuffled aside by family members who found them inconvenient. Immediately, the paperwork took 3 days to complete. During that time, I maintained my routine at the nursing home, ate the terrible food, participated in the mindless activities, and let the staff think I was adjusting to my new circumstances. But every morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Dorothy was my co-conspirator and sounding board. She'd review my plans each evening, pointing out potential problems and suggesting improvements. Her legal background was invaluable, and her enthusiasm for what she called justified rebellion was infectious. You know, she said one night as we sat in the garden area, watching you plan this has reminded me that I'm not dead yet either. Maybe it's time I stopped acting like I was. What do you mean? My daughter stuck me here because it was convenient for her. But I've got money of my own, and there's nothing stopping me from leaving except habit and fear. She smiled. After we finish dealing with your son, maybe you could help me plan my own escape. I realized that what I was doing wasn't just about getting revenge on Dominic. It was about refusing to accept that being 62 meant being powerless. It was about proving that age doesn't equal helplessness, and that family members who think they can manipulate elderly relatives need to think again. 2 weeks after my meeting with Margaret Peterson, I got a postcard from Dominic. The picture showed the Eiffel Tower, and on the back he'd written, "Having an amazing time. Hope you're adjusting well to Sunset Manor. The staff says you're fitting right in. Love, D&A." Fitting right in. The condescension dripped from every word. I showed the postcard to Dorothy, who laughed out loud. "Oh, honey, if he only knew what you've been up to while he's been taking pictures of French monuments." That evening, I made one final phone call from the lobby. This time, I was calling Linda Hayes. "It's done," she told me. "Everything's in place. The timing couldn't be more perfect." "And you're sure about the legalities?" "Absolutely. You have every right to do what you're doing. In fact, I'm impressed by how thoroughly you've thought this through." I hung up the phone and looked around the lobby of Sunset Manor one last time. In a few weeks, I'd be leaving this place, but not as the defeated old woman who'd arrived. I'd be leaving as someone who'd refused to be discarded, who'd fought back against a system designed to warehouse people like me. Dominic thought he'd won by selling my house and sticking me in a nursing home. He thought he'd solved the problem of an aging mother who might interfere with his plans. But he'd forgotten something important about the woman who'd raised him. I'd survived the Great Depression as a child, worked my way through school during World War II, raised 2 children while holding down a job, and nursed my husband through his final illness without breaking. I was a lot tougher than my son had ever given me credit for, and he was about to find out exactly how tough. The postcard from Paris was still in my hand. I looked at it one more time, then tore it into small pieces and dropped them in the trash. Game on, Dominic. The law office of Peterson & Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a downtown building that had seen better days. But Margaret Peterson herself was everything Dorothy had promised. Sharp, experienced, and most importantly, angry on behalf of clients like me. Mrs. Mitchell, she said, reviewing the documents I'd managed to obtain copies of. What your son did isn't just morally reprehensible, it's criminal fraud. I sat across from her desk, Dorothy beside me for moral support. Getting out of Sunset Manor for this appointment had required lying to the staff about a doctor's visit, but Dorothy had coached me through it. The nursing home operated on the assumption that residents were too addled or defeated to cause trouble. They didn't pay much attention to where we went during the day as long as we showed up for evening medications. The power of attorney you signed, Margaret continued, pulling out a magnifying glass to examine the signature, was clearly altered after the fact. Look here. The ink density is different. The paper has been tampered with, and the notarization is questionable at best. She leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. Your son took a limited medical power of attorney and modified it to appear as though you'd granted him broad financial authority. Then he used that fraudulent document to sell your house without your knowledge or consent. Can we get the house back? Absolutely. The sale is void. You can't legally transfer property based on forged documents. But there's a complication. My heart sank. What kind of complication? The buyers are innocent third parties. They purchased the house in good faith, believing your son had the legal right to sell it. While we can absolutely reverse the sale and get your house back, it's going to take time. Meanwhile, they've moved in and started making improvements. How much time? 3 to 6 months, assuming your son doesn't fight us? If he does, she shrugged. Could be longer. 3 to 6 months. I thought about the institutional meals, the shared bathroom, the constant smell of disinfectant and defeat. Then I thought about Dominic and Amber toasting their good fortune in some European hotel, probably already planning how to spend the rest of what they thought was their inheritance. There's something else, Margaret said carefully. The sale price concerns me. $250,000 for a house in your neighborhood? I looked up recent comparables, and similar properties have been selling for closer to $400,000. Either your son was in a tremendous hurry to close the deal, or what? Or there was some kind of arrangement between him and the buyers, a below-market sale that benefited someone other than you. I felt a cold fury building in my chest. Not only had Dominic stolen my house, he'd sold it for far less than it was worth. Either through incompetence or corruption, he'd cheated me out of an additional $150,000. What do you recommend? I asked. Margaret pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. First, we file criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. The district attorney's office takes these cases seriously, especially when there's clear evidence of document forgery. Second, we file a civil suit to reverse the sale and recover damages.